Yes. Okay. Anything of a fiduciary nature typically involves trust. It comes from a Latin word called fiduciare, which has to do with good faith, doing things in good faith. That's where the word fidelity comes from. And that's where the opposite of fidelity comes from, which is, who knows the opposite of fidelity?
Infidelity.
Infidelity.
I hope so, because that's a word you all need to know. Infidelity. So if fiduciary has to do with fidelity, which is trust, then we know that infidelity has to do with distrust. So any financial institution or any entity whatsoever that has the fiduciary responsibility, it is a duty of trust. If any of you hold an ASU in this class, you have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that that bloody money is not mishandled in any form or fashion, as is the responsibility of any financial institution. That's why it's there. Okay. So the board has this major overall fiduciary responsibility, as does the entire organization. Okay. Keep going, Lucia.
Okay, so we're on 4.4. The board is initially responsible for setting and confirming the organization's strategic direction, business focus, and corporate values. As such, it is critical for a licensee to be able to proactively identify and understand the sufficient risk that it faces in achieving its business objectives through its business strategy and plans, as well as to be able to demonstrate appropriate, effective, and prudent management of those risks. Such understanding is fundamental to establishing appropriate business strategies and plans, to decision making, and to implementing risk management policies, procedures, and controls. The process of corporate governance includes the responsibility to maintain appropriate and effective risk management and encourage safe and sound business practices. The board may appoint supporting committees and engage management to assist in fulfilling these responsibilities. The board may delegate authority to management, but not its ultimate responsibility.
Before you go on, Lucia, can somebody name 3 of the committees that we discussed so far without looking?
The audit
Committee.
compensation, sorry.
Audit,
The
the audit committee,
compensation board
the
committee.
compensation committee, yep. One more. The other important one. When you want to
Audit.
run for
Nomination.
The nomination.
nomination.
Oh,
I would encourage you to know all the committees because you don't know which one I'm going to ask, but those 3, they keep coming up. Of course, I may pick 3 others that don't, that we didn't really beat to death, but those 3 keep coming up. So you want to know those committees, like what do they do? Especially those 3, because you never know what an examiner might raise. Okay, in an examination, not designed to make you miserable, just to let you so you can familiarize yourself with those little bits and pieces. Okay? Remember, you don't have to remember everything verbatim, word for word. You just need to learn what they are in the shortest possible context so that you can explain it, describe it, or discuss it. See how that works? All right, keep going.
Okay. The licensee's senior management is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the business, serving as a link between the board and staff. The senior management is responsible for implementing the licensee's strategic plan, keeping the board adequately informed about the performance of the licensee through financial and management reports, and the reports prepared by internal auditors, external auditors, the compliance officer, and regulators.
Now, that seems like a simple quest statement, but let me tell you that B is loaded. Okay, that's some serious governance stuff. And a lot of companies run into trouble because they do not do a great job of executing point B. Senior managers are oftentimes not communicating with the board about these things properly, timely, or effectively. Sometimes it's because of incompetence. Other times it's because they're deliberately hiding information from the board for whatever reason. Now, we don't see that in the guidelines because we're talking about what entities ought to do. But the truth of the matter is, if we're saying they ought to do, we have to be thinking that all too often they don't. Okay, so keep that in mind. Keep going, Lucia.
C, advising the board of the appropriate organizational structure and ensuring that the quantity and quality of staff resources are available to carry out all tasks, including internal audit and compliance. Implementing and maintaining risk management systems appropriate to the scale, nature, and complexity of the licensee.
I like it. Let it rip.
What's this?
Oh,
Delineating.
oh, yeah. Somebody jump in. What is that?
Delineating.
Yeah, delineating. That's a nice word to Google too. While she's reading delineating, so can somebody look it up so you can like shout what it is along the way? Okay, delineating.
You want me to continue or wait?
Absolutely. They'll shout it when they find it. Keep going.
Okay, delineating and documenting the areas of responsibility for each staff member and ensuring that reporting lines are clear and appropriate. In the context of the scale, nature, and complexity of the licensee.
The meaning, sorry, to
Don't apologize.
describe or portray something precise.
Yeah,
Precise.
to describe or portray something precisely. Yes?
So,
Yeah. So now you have another interesting word in your repertoire. Delineating, meanings breaking something down and describing it carefully so that there's no misunderstanding about what needs to be done. See? And that's the great thing about this stuff. This stuff is not just to introduce you to corporate governance only and to get through your examination, but you learn interesting words and concepts along the way that could certainly be useful later, for sure. All right, keep going.
Communicating the licensee's strategic direction, reporting lines and risk tolerances throughout the organization, and overseeing management information systems to enable timely and accurate dissemination of information to the board and regulators. Where a licensee is a branch of a foreign bank physically located in the Bahamas, the local senior management is expected to assume the responsibilities set forth in the guidelines of the board of directors of an organization. Ensure that the principles of good governance and risk management in these guidelines are appropriately adapted to and addressed in the management of the branch in a manner suitable to the nature of their individual operations. Satisfy the requirements, where applicable, of the responsibilities of senior management as outlined above. Ensure compliance with the local laws and regulations. Ensure that appropriate organizational structure and accountability framework are in place to ensure effective oversight of all key inherent risk areas of the branch's local operations, and to ensure that the management processes and risk control systems and procedures that have been implemented for the parent bank are utilized by the local bank and are utilized by the local branch, are compatible with the with the requirement of these guidelines. Sorry.
Let me just say something for you Scotia bankers, for example, whose parent company is where? Where's your parent company?
In Canada.
In Canada. It has always been in Canada. It was in Canada decades ago when I was a young Scotia banker, and it's still there. So in the Bahamas, we have branches, yes, for Scotiabank.
Yes.
Yes. And so what we're saying here in this narrative that Lucia was just reading, that if you are a branch or branches of a parent company in the Bahamas, you are expected to follow the governance guidelines of the parent company as well as the guidelines as put forth by the Central Bank of the Bahamas to make sure that all the governance requirements are covered, notwithstanding that you are a branch or branches in the Bahamas of a
Question,
parent company.
Mr. Wilkinson, sorry to cut you off.
No problem.
So another financial institution has a parent company, yes, in Canada as well.
Right.
There, but Canada doesn't, I wouldn't say govern, but let me just say I work for the institution and we do not answer directly to Canada. We have to answer to Trinidad, so to say. And we actually run under a different scope from Canada, even though all is one.
Indeed.
Would this apply here? As if, say, Trinidad has their separate rules and Canada has separate rules.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and that's why I brought it up in the first place with this issue of branches and the governance process. Yeah, in your case, you have what we call a tripartite situation: head office, the Trinidad connection, and then the local branches in the Bahamas. Now, the question is, does the parent company have its set of corporate governance guidelines in Canada?
Yes, sir. So,
Okay.
okay. So the branches report to Canada and the background departments, like our loans and credit, loans and LCC departments or business banking departments, they report to Trinidad, so to say.
Indeed. Now we're getting warm. So Canada has its set of guidelines for corporate governance, and then does Trinidad have its set of corporate guidelines, governance guidelines?
Okay, I worked in both departments or under both departments, and yes.
Yeah, they both have.
Canada runs different, the branches, quote unquote, run differently from the background departments from my experience.
Indeed.
So
Indeed.
with the branches, you follow a certain, basically all is the same with the gist of everything, as in you can't break rules or et cetera, et cetera. But when you look at other rules or performance guidelines and stuff like that, it's different.
Indeed. So, for example, the general principles of good governance from the head office might very well apply to the head office, Trinidad, and the branches in the Bahamas.
Yes.
Generally speaking, and
Yeah.
then depending on the
Trinidad has their own rules for
yeah,
back,
sure.
or
Depending
Canada will just say, okay, just the branches just follow our rules.
depending on the jurisdiction and the business activity that's going on, you
Yeah.
might see some variations, and that's fine as long as those variations do not violate the general principles of good governance and they do not violate directly the guidelines as put forth by the Central Bank of the Bahamas for those entities operating in the Bahamas. Do you follow?
Yeah. So
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So yeah, the parent company's guidelines might govern overall. The Trinidadian jurisdictional guidelines, because of the business, the operational or other relationship that might go on, might have specifics. And then in the Bahamas, The branches are governed by certainly the head office to some extent, the Trinidadian office to some extent, and certainly by the Central Bank of the Bahamas, who's the primary regulator of financial institutions in the Bahamas. So at the end of the day, central bank wants to be satisfied that whatever practices are being considered and adhered to, that they are consistent with the local best practices as put forward by the licensee here in the Bahamas, by all means. All right, excellent question. All right, keep going, the chair. Keep going, the chair. Did she run off a coffee?
Sorry, I was reading and it was muted.
Oh, okay. All right.
Management, under the general direction of and oversight by the board, should develop and implement a comprehensive risk management system commensurate with the scope of the licensee's activities, incorporating continuous measurement, monitoring, and controlling of risk. The board itself should specifically address significant issues in the system's development and implementation, as well as implement an effective process to independently determine that the risk management system is appropriate and ensure that its effectiveness is regularly assessed. Such systems use accurate and reliable management information systems, timely and relevant risk analysis and reporting, thorough control standards, processes, and programs.
Before Lucia goes on, let me ask you guys, looking at A, B, and C, what are the action words that get your attention? The key action words that get your attention about the seriousness of this thing.
Management.
Accurate,
Accurate. No doggone fudged up, lying, cook the books, too stinky, unclear, weird stuff. Accurate. What's the other word?
Reliable.
Reliable. Okay. Has anybody ever run into an unreliable person?
yes,
Okay. So the board does not want any unreliable information either from the management or the management information system. See my point? Any other action words?
timely,
Timely and relevant. Don't be late. Don't send the information to the boards. Well, this is last year. But are you kidding me? We need it for the current period, Mr. CEO. And you try this again, we're firing you. How the hell you could bring us stuff from last year? How can we make proper decisions based on that? We need current information, and it needs to be relevant to the current situation that's going on in this company. My. Any other action words? No?
thorough,
Thorough, why not? Anybody ever ran into somebody that was not thorough in the way they did things?
all the time,
All the time. So don't assume that if you're senior management or anybody else, that your board, your boss, your supervisor, whatever, would want information that is not thorough, would want processes and standards that are not thorough. It's the same principle. Okay, this is what good governance is all about. See, bunch of action words, but they're all very crucial. Okay, and the reason why a lot of firms run into trouble and entities because we keep violating these action words, either by accident, poor training, or, God forbid, on purpose. My. That on purpose is a little spooky. That's what generates bad governance, the on purpose thing, to do the wrong thing. All right, keep going, the chair, and include. Unmute.
And include. Sorry, my house is very busy.
That's okay.
And include
You-
oversight through.
You have my condolences. My house is very quiet now. I have an empty nest. My babies are gone, so I get it completely. That don't worry
Yeah.
about it. Let it rip.
Okay.
Hmm.
Oh, come in. And include oversight through external auditors, and where the size and nature of a licensee's businesses warrant, as determined by the board, separate and independent risk management and internal audit functions. Using these systems, the board utilizing the advice of management should periodically obtain reasonable assurance that the organization has an ongoing, appropriate, and effective strategic management process. Obtain reasonable assurance that the organization has an ongoing, appropriate, and risk management program. Obtain reasonable assurance that the organization operates within an appropriate and effective control environment. Reassess the organization's business objectives, strategies, and plans, and discuss and approve all significant policies and procedures for the organization.
Thank you so much, Lucia, for that insightful presentation and information. Every single page and paragraph seems to have been loaded with something of importance that specifically and directly related to good governance. And so, of course, we're not going to remember everything overnight, but certainly anything we do remember is going to be a plus towards how effectively and how well we all do our jobs from the board all the way down to the bottom of the organization. Notice that the board is expected to obtain reasonable assurance. See, not perfect assurance. There's no such thing. It's perfect, but reasonable assurance that whatever plans they put in place for the long-term strategic plans, that management is carrying them out. If they're not, management has to say why they're not carrying them out. Also, reasonable assurance with regards to the risk management program, whatever the risk management program is. So if your company, for example, is a crypto company, what are the risk issues connected to crypto and virtual assets? That's going to be a busy board because there's a lot of talk about the risks involved in crypto assets and crypto virtual programs of any kind. Okay? But not only crypto, any other activities that are going on that create a risk for the particular company. The board needs to know what they are so that they can take steps to correct them. A reasonable assurance about the internal and external controls within the company. Are they working? Are we having regular audits? Are we getting clean audits? What are the concerns of the auditors? Are these the same concerns we saw last year? What are the concerns of the regulators when they come in to do inspections? Are these the bloody same ones they mentioned last year and the year before? And if they are, why have they not been fixed? Who has been charged with getting it fixed? Why is it taking so long to get fixed? Do we need to get rid of them and find somebody who will fix it? See, that's what board should be doing. In between caviar and wine and big, juicy, delicious lunches. Okay, for sure. All right, and certainly, let's not forget E, reasonable insurance and consistent discussion about the company's policies and procedures. Are they up to date? Who's responsible for them? Do they have direct responsibility, or is it just an afterthought? Do we just look at it when the inspectors come in and say it's not current? Who's responsible for the board, the company's policies and procedures? But these are crucial questions that any board, yeah, we're talking about the central bank and their best practices for financial institutions, but typically you can see right away, these things can apply to practically any kind of entity. And so these principle-based requirements are very pervasive and can be applied just like the guiding principles and the OECD principles. They all interconnect to provide those things that boards should be doing across the board, no matter the nature of the business. Okay. And so this takes us into the next part of our discussion about risk management. We already told that the board is responsible for all types of risk management. And you can see on page 7 that there's a long list, depending on the type of business you're in, of the kinds of risks that are out there facing your company. It is the management and board's responsibility to decide which of these risks affect them, what issues are currently outstanding that can create problems, and then take steps to fix it. Okay? So it's a long list: credit risk, liquidity risk, market interest, fiduciary. Do you have any persons in the firm who are creating any fiduciary risks? Are they acting untrustworthy? Are they doing things that are out of context? Okay. Reputation risk, operational risk. Are we doing stuff from day to day that is interfering with operations and can create risk towards it not working effectively? Technology risk. Okay, compliance risk, see? Settlement risk, even settlement of transactions in a timely manner to make sure the company the entity takes advantage of the currency exchanges, etc. Okay, so the whole legal risk, and that list is not exhaustive. Okay, depending on what country and jurisdiction you're in, you can think of a whole lot of other risks that can apply, not to mention country risks. For example, trying to do business with Ukraine right now is a country risk issue. Okay, for sure. Trying to get information out of Ukraine and Russia right now during the war creates a very unique kind of risk in terms of what's going on in those countries. Okay, and so these things have to, of course, trying to do business with Russia creates something we call sanctions risk now that is not on this list, but it's definitely an issue because any country found violating sanctions risk and we find themselves being sanctioned by the United States and Europe and other countries just for doing business with Russia because of this war. Okay? So boards need to be constantly thinking and looking at the type of risks. Senior management needs to keep boards apprised of the kinds of risks that are out there that they're facing and what needs to be done to fix those problems before they come back to haunt the company and put it in a position they don't want to deal with. Okay. What is reputation risk, anyone?
Anything that, go ahead.
Yeah,
As-
reputation risk.
Anything that could pose damage to the company's reputation or quote unquote face, character, anything like that.
No question about it. Anything that can create negativity towards the company creates a reputational risk. So if somebody begins a rumor on Facebook that a particular bank is getting ready to close down and run off with people's money, people will run to the bank and start taking the money out. Or if negative reports come in about a particular financial institution being involved in illegal activity, money laundering, fraud, human trafficking, or whatever the case might be, that can create serious reputational risk if the institution cannot get it resolved. Okay, for sure. We already know what fiduciary risk is. Anything that creates a lack of trust, whether it's fraud or otherwise, senior management running off with money belonging to the institution, giving exorbitant loans to each other, whatever it is that violates any trust issues, we consider it a fiduciary risk. Interest rate risk, of course, we know that interest rates are now going up, so everything is becoming expensive for companies to borrow. And so those who have borrowings out there and investments out there and bonds out there will find themselves paying more in order to raise money, etc. So all these risks are out there, and these are the things that boards need to be thinking about. Okay. Liquidity risk. Does the company have enough money to pay its bills? That's always a big issue, whether it's a little itsy bitsy company or multi-billion-dollar entity, financial institution, or otherwise. Making sure, and this is why, for example, the Central Bank of the Bahamas has certain liquidity requirements for financial institutions so that they don't go ahead and use money up. And then when it's time to pay bills, pay in loan payments, etc., they don't have enough money to pay. Then it creates a problem if they borrow some more and put the company into further debt. So these are all real issues. Okay? If you're a lender, what is your credit risk? Are you lending too freely? Are you not lending enough? I saw something in the paper not too long ago. The governor of the central bank was saying that in order for banks to get their act together and start getting back into the lending groove as it was pre-COVID, something has to be done about getting delinquency down to a reasonable percentage, etc. And these are all part of the credit risk issues that financial institutions would no doubt be discussing. Okay. Did we discuss the resolve issue? Anyone?
No.
We didn't discuss resolve?
Don't recall.
Wow. Anybody knows what resolve is all about? Resolve Limited? No? Interesting. Anybody knows about those bad loans that were transferred from Bank of the Bahamas a couple
They
of years ago?
discussed it from BOB last week.
Yeah, now I remember, yeah.
Yeah, now for real, I remember.
Yeah, we did. How much did we say was involved in that deal?
500
Half a
billion
billion?
or
Million.
million?
Million.
Okay, million.
500 billion is half of what?
$500 million.
Is that a lot of money?
Very much so.
Especially for a country
Yes, it is.
as small as?
The Bahamas.
Yeah. Now, speaking about credit risk, clearly not enough people was thinking about credit risk when those bad loans were made. Are we on the same page with regards to the reality of this thing, Clarence?
Speaking about credit risk, they started it now. However, one bank isn't on it, so you still have you're getting a loan from the other banks. You still have to go back to the bank, and ask them for a reference letter, which doesn't make. All banks should be on board.
You're talking about the credit bureau?
Yeah. So apparently, I think it's CIBC that isn't included on it. So if you're getting a loan from another bank and you have a facility with them, you're still gonna have to go and get a reference letter from CIBC.
I know we just really gone full force on it.
Yeah, it too. As I'm saying, because dealing with people, you have to still go and get dealing with clients, you still have to go and get a reference letter from
Seriousness of this matter. Okay. That-
CIBC.
Sorry?
I say you still have to get a reference letter from CIBC, even though we have the credit bureau.
Interesting enough. The credit bureau is now in play?
Yes, it is. It's a
And-
charge of $24, I think, to do the check.
My, when did it start effectively?
I was on maternity leave, so I can't basically say when, but I got a revamp of my loan in September and they charged me $24 for it.
So how do you access your credit information?
I'm not sure how they access it, but I know with my mortgage, they weren't able to get any information from CIBC. So they was telling me I have to go back to CIBC and get a reference letter saying that I'm good standing with my mortgage payments.
Indeed, which
So
means,
when I go back to work, not this week, next week, I'm gonna see the full breakdown of everything.
indeed, which means that even though they've begun to get the credit gathering information is still ongoing, some financial institutions have not provided information for one reason or another, have not gotten it to them yet, or may be thinking they're not going to send it at all. But yeah, it's an ongoing process. What is interesting though is it is now actually underway. I don't think there are a lot of Bahamians who are actually aware that it's underway. Okay, and that information can now be obtained from the credit bureaus. And can individuals actually just contact the bureau and get information?
Yes,
I'm-
they can.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and how do we do that? They have a phone
Um,
number, email.
No, I think they have to go to the website. Well, they have to fill out a form and then email it to a particular email, and it takes about, I think, 3 days. I could be wrong. But yeah, they can access the information themselves.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I have a question. When did the credit bureau come into full effect? Because as a central banker, this is news to me.
Interesting, Alexandria.
Very, I'm very in tuned.
Miss Fista, I can't say when it come into effect, but I know when
I know they had passed the legislation for it, but because there is some anomalies surrounding as to the timeline as to what information they need to get from the credit bureau, that hasn't really been sorted out as yet. So what information exactly are they getting and how far back are they going?
I can't confirm, but I was saying I was home on maternity leave, but I did sign. When I go back to work, I'll see what all
Yes.
given.
Because like I
But-
said, I mean, they have the right to do that. And I mean, I say that they don't, but it's just interesting that that's the way that they're going about it. And where did they gather the information from?
Well, like, which is one of the reasons why you still have to go back to CIBC to get approval and so on, because the matter is clearly an ongoing situation, and this disclosure of information and transfer of information and details, etc., is not going to be an overnight affair, notwithstanding that there might have been a soft opening, quote unquote, somewhere along the way. So Jeffries, when you go back, you'll check to see what the deal is.
Yes, sir.
You know what? Put an asterisk to my name. When you find out what the deal is, send me an email and tell me what the deal is. Because I'm
Yes.
curious. And tell me how I can go and find out for myself what the deal is. Okay?
I just want to add to one of the questions that Fista asked, as it relates to how far back. I know they said they were capturing information as far back as 2018.
Right.
So I could answer.
Okay, that ain't that far back. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I know we were saying that it should be a cutoff at some point. And how far back do you want to go? That was the anomaly.
Right.
Really trying to get the credit bureau. Because, you have persons who, let's just say they had an outstanding credit card for 15 years. Do you really want to go back that far? There was a lot of anomalies around. That's why I asked how far back. If it's 24 months, that's what, 36 months? Pardon me?
And they say after 7 years, anything off the books, eh?
Well, legally, yeah.
But legally, yeah, but we talking about financial institutions. No shade. But financial institutions try their best to recoup anything that they can when they can. So
Yeah, even if it's older than 7 years, and you can
yeah.
get
Yeah, that's how you have to look at it. You can't look at it as, okay, anything past 7 years is off the book. You have to look at financial institutions want to recoup their money regardless.
But you cannot sue them for it after 7 years.
Right, you cannot sue them after 7 years.
You can still recover if you can make a deal. Okay.
Right.
Mr. You who's given the information? I have a next question. Sorry.
For who, Mr. Wilkinson?
Yeah.
Gia, was that Gia who's given information?
Yeah.
Gia, question. Are they including bills? So if my BPL bill didn't pay from Jabim time, they include that, like it all.
I don't think they started it as yet. The last time I heard, I don't think they started it as yet, but that is their intention to include utilities and furniture plus them.
Well, I can say this, if they include utilities, nobody could qualify for nothing. The
Ah.
BPL is your rent.
Uh,
BPL is your rent and your
well,
mortgage in one.
let me just say this. While the intent for that thing is good, for a lot of Bahamians, it's going to be an unholy nightmare. And for many Bahamians in a certain category, it's going to be very crippling for them. Okay?
Yeah, the same come to help the Bahamian people.
And so it's going to be interesting. And maybe over time, they will uncripple themselves, put on some crutches, get their legs fixed or whatever to settle down. But initially, in the initial years to come, it's going to be very crippling for many Bahamians, and it's going to create major hardship for a certain group of Bahamians.
Yeah, but I mean, my personal opinions, this is personal. I get why they would want to, because that is considered you being able to pay your bills on time. But my thing is keep it off the books for as long as you possibly can, because our electricity system has their own issues. So
Each of the credit areas have their own issues. That's the point.
right. So like keep that off as long as they possibly can. And I know that's something they do plan to include. They do plan to include all utilities as well as rent at some point as well. But as far as utilities, keep them off the books, man.
Well, the light bill is going up in November, so that's going to make it interesting in terms of current information going
exactly. And that's unfortunate.
Right out of COVID, right out of this and that. It's a tricky time for all kinds. Right out of COVID, we have the credit bureau. Right out of COVID, we have an increase in. So it's rather interesting situation, and it does make you wonder about the strategic governance thoughts behind those kinds of decisions. But I suspect time will tell about these things. I guess as usual, like any war, there'll be casualties, and then maybe the hope is that things will settle down, people will be renewed, people will be educated, but it will not get rid of the casualty of war. Some will die, some will be collateral damage, and so on until the whole thing right sizes up, I suppose. All right, so yeah. So now you see and again, these are all risk discussions, because the risk involved in all these things that we've discussed in the last 10 or 15 minutes, they're very real. Okay, as is any other kind of risk related to governance or otherwise. Okay, so it's something to think about. All right. So with those risk issues, boards have to decide how are we going to manage all these different kinds of risks that potentially face our organization. Some boards consider having annual reviews done so they get information from management and others to keep track of what's going on. And then they use this information to make decisions about their risk profile, and decisions about their policies and procedures, and decisions about their internal controls, and so on. Decisions about how they're going to adhere to new laws and regulations, how they're going to change the internal control and operational systems. All of this stuff they hope to make decisions about once they get the proper information, quote unquote, from their management and compliance people. Okay, so this is clearly an ongoing concern for boards. And so again, these issues that are coming through from the central bank are just designed to help provide principles to boards and senior management to help them try to get their act together and to keep things as balanced as possible. Okay. If you look at 417, you'll see through a review, the board and management will demonstrate to the central bank certain things, that they're doing certain things like conducting annual reviews to show that the overall effectiveness of their organizations are being conducted, and that they have the ability to get things resolved. And essentially, this is what the central bank wants to hear. The regulators in general want to hear. One of the important features of the board review is to make sure that information is coming in from internal and external auditors, absolutely crucial parts of the organization in terms of information, so that the board will not be left in the dark with regards to what's going on in the organization. Okay? Believe it or not, some boards are not aware of what's going on, the important stuff, on purpose, God forbid, or maybe sometimes through incompetence or poor management information reporting systems. Whatever it is, a lot of times boards are not aware. Then there are other times they are aware, they just don't take any action. They move too slowly. They don't want to do certain things because it's going to interfere with something else, which of course creates a problem at the end of the day. Okay? The central bank also has an annual certification requirement, whereby in the 120 days, this is 419, after the end of each calendar year, the board will be required to provide certain certifications to the central bank saying that they have checked and followed through with certain things. And this, of course, is a requirement by the central bank so that they can now monitor what the boards are doing and to help the board stay on top of what they're supposed to be doing. And certainly these annual certifications are going to become important when central banks and other regulators come in to do inspections, because they're coming in with this review where you said as a board signed off by the chairman and others board members that these things have been done, are being done. And so they're going to come in and check some of those things just to make sure that everybody is on the same page and doing what is required, right? So when these annual reviews and certifications are being done, it's not a good idea to just put stuff down for the record. Okay, make sure that you are in fact doing them as a board and as senior management, so that you can defend them if they ever come into question in any particular year. Okay. Now, if you look at Section 5, the responsibilities of the board under COBOB guidelines, they are very consistent with what we saw in the guiding principles. Appointment of the chief executive, overseeing the appointment of other senior management people, very consistent. Again, these CBOB best practices come out of the OECD best practices, come out of the guiding principles. They all come out of the same source. And for us, the CBOB's practices have been adapted in some cases to suit our jurisdiction, but generally speaking, they all meet these abiding principles that we have out there that we're all expected to deal with and make sure that they are in place. Okay? Checking the performance of the firm, the effectiveness and evaluation of senior management, making sure that risk management is being properly adhered to, management succession issues are being dealt with. All of these are board responsibilities. We've seen these before, and they remain consistent throughout the issue of corporate governance. Okay, no matter what the entity might be. In this case, we're talking financial institutions, but again, hey, any entity is at play. All right. So, having said that, let's roll down, because again, all through Section 5, we're talking about the board responsibilities, most of which we've seen before, for the development of strategic plans and implementing those plans and making sure that the management carry those out. Making sure, if you look at 5.8, the board is responsible for appointing the compliance officer or delegating the senior management person to do so, as well as the money laundering reporting officer. These are all positions that must always be discussed at the board level, because both of these positions are responsible for reporting to the board as part of the company's management information systems process, and making sure that the board is aware at all times of any compliance and MLRO failures with regards to suspicious transaction reporting and the implications of those reports and the results of investigations and analysis that might be conducted by the FIU from time to time. All right. Negative news does not mean that you hide the information from the board, whether you're compliance or MLRO. Those responsibilities are appointed and monitored from the board level for a reason, to provide certain independence to the board of these two particular groups so that they can report without fear of what they have to do. But sometimes, depending on the organization you're in, senior management sometimes try to intimidate compliance officers and MLROs when they have to make certain reports that are inconsistent with what senior management may wish to be reported to the board for some strange reason. Okay. And so MLROs and COs are expected to be able to report without any fear of admonition from senior management or anybody else. Very interesting. So those of you who may find yourselves one day becoming compliance MLRO persons, know that you have the support of the Central Bank of the Bahamas with regards to your reporting requirements to the board. And in some cases, you have the ability to go directly to the Central Bank if you have a concern and say so. That's how.
Mr. Wilkinson, can I interject here?
Absolutely.
There are instances where I'm talking with the compliance officers and the MLROs where they're saying that they're reporting directly to the board according to their JDs, right? And then when we go in and we do on-site examinations, we realize that that is not the case. And most times we give them short period of time to kind of rectify that situation, or else they do get themselves in problems.
Yeah.
And instances, we have a entity right now who in the past 2 years, they've had 3 on-site examinations because they've just gone contrary. And in 3 years, they've had 4 different MLROs.
Yes, thank you very much. That is absolutely crucial information because it really gives some insights to, especially those persons who may not be aware of the intricacies of what she's talking about. But it is crucial in the financial services area when these things are happening to know that these things are happening, that they are real, and that if you find yourself in any of these environments where you have these responsibilities, that you have a duty to act. And you can see in this particular example that she gives an excellent topology example about things that are going wrong, contrary to these governance requirements, all of these best practices that we're talking about. They are running the opposite direction for some strange and interesting reason. Okay, and the fact that they had to come under the knife 3 times and changing MLROs is never good. Unfortunately, we have seen a significant, as she mentioned, a significant amount of turnover in the area of MLROs and compliance officers, and that in itself is a governance concern. And make no mistake, regulators are not turning a blind eye. For those of you in financial services, they are quite aware of this situation, and wherever it's happening, it really doesn't bode well for that particular institution in terms of the perception of how they govern their affairs.
Also, too, I would also like to let everybody know that MLROs and COs are supposed to be local. You're not supposed to, like a lot of these parent companies, they like to want to appoint these persons who are not locally, jurisdictionally in the Bahamas. And that's also against our rules in terms of corporate governance as well, because if you're appointing someone, they should be able to understand the business here, not from a distance.
In other words, they should be physically in the Bahamas.
They should be physically in the Bahamas. That's a part of our physical and propriety fitness guidelines.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Alex, for that. That was helpful.
Yeah. So if you have a Chinese branch bank in the Bahamas and they want to appoint Jingling Wong, who's in China somewhere, that will not fly. That is not the requirement and it should not happen. Okay, so that is a very important piece of information. Another thing I've seen with regards to governance issues, we have a lot of CEOs and S1 officers who call themselves compliance officers. How they can be independent as an S1 senior CEO and be a compliance officer begs the question.
Mr. Wilkinson, I'll interject in here as well. We do make provisions for that, but
Yeah.
it has to be on a well, we do it mostly for the senior twos, not necessarily senior ones. But if it's a smaller entity whereby they may just have 2 or 3 people within the organization, they
Yeah.
can, but they would have to write it. They just can't do it, else they will be fined. They'll have to write in indicating that, hey, we only have X amount of persons within the organization. We would like them to also operate as a CO MLRO. And we do make provisions for that as long as an explanation is provided. And we are able to see just how much persons work within the institution, because there are a few where it is a dual role. But of course, those are special considerations. That's not the
Okay.
practice.
Yeah, case by case.
Case by case, right? So like if that's a institution only has 3 people, that'd probably be a senior 1, a senior 2, and maybe the administrative assistant. So in circumstances like that, we'll give a special consideration for the senior 2 to be the MLRO,
Yeah.
not necessarily the senior 1.
And who would be the CEO in that particular situation?
Pardon me?
Who would be the CEO in that situation?
Not all organizations have CEOs. Some of them have, they do both roles, CEO
Okay.
and MLRO.
Okay.
Like a Scotiabank and RBC, the bigger banks still probably have 2 because of their business. But
Right.
the smaller entities, they'll just have either or the person will be performing a dual role.
Dual role. Excellent. Okay, so those of you bankers in particular in financial institutions, that's very important information to know, depending on the environment in which you're in. Okay. Of course, they are the governance exceptions. They are not the rule. Okay. It's very important. Thank you so much, Alexandria. Very, very important. If you look at 511, the board should regularly review the licensee's financial statements. And that's what we'll be talking about in the next half of our semester, securities markets and financial statements, our area where there's a whole lot of violation in terms of good governance, unfortunately. Okay, person's still cooking the books and running their own little program and fixing numbers and giving inadequate information, late information, and all this crazy stuff. In an effort to run whatever programs they plan to run. Okay, until of course they're discovered and then action has to be taken against them. We already discussed the issue with committees. We saw that in pretty much some detail throughout our discussions this semester. The central bank does talk about having those committees again, of course. They make particular reference in 6.6 to 3 of the key ones that we talked about all the time. I wonder if I'm going to ask about these 3 in the exam. It seems very likely it keeps coming up. The nomination committee, the audit committee, and compensation committee, you need to know them just in case they keep coming up because they are absolutely crucial to the governance process. In section 7, we have the role of the independent director. We've beaten that guy to death. Just know that the central bank requires that guy, and in some cases, a number of them, to sit on those boards. And we know the reason now. Okay. In organizations, institutions are reminded under CBOB guidelines. Don't forget, you need to have that INED. That INED needs to be independent. That INED's comments need to be put in the minutes. Do not try to intimidate that bloody INED. Don't fire them just because they don't agree with everything you say. All the things we've seen before. apply under these guidelines. Okay, for sure. And of course, again, like we saw earlier, the central bank requires INEDs to be independent. Now, if you go down to 8.3, you will see what does not constitute an independent. In particular, the following persons are not considered independent. So if you have somebody on your board in one of these categories, they're not considered independent and shouldn't be there according to the central bank. Okay, right? So if an individual holds a position of senior official 1 or 2, they're not considered independent as an INED.
I have a dumb question.
No such thing. Let it rip.
What is a senior official 1 or 2? I don't know what that is. I've been hearing about this, but I don't know what this is.
No, that's a perfect question. I was hoping somebody would raise it because I know everybody is not connected to financial institutions. Alexandria, can you help your colleague with S1 and S2? Alexandria? Alexandria's gone for coffee.
Sorry, hold on, Andre, hold on. Sorry, Mr. Wilkinson, what was that?
Alexandria?
Yes?
Yeah, one of your colleagues would like to know what do we mean by senior official 1 and 2?
Okay, guess, hold on, one quick second, hold on 1 second. I can answer right now, hold on.
Credit unions, and then they call these credit information providers.
Okay.
So all the information is, you haven't gotten all the information from all these people who's supposed to submit.
So
even
what
though
are they
it's full,
submitting?
it's
So
not-
what is it? So it's basically whatever information that bank has on that individual at that point.
Exactly.
So they can't source information from other banks for their credit report. They only could get whatever information they have.
Well, I don't think so, because that's the whole point of this credit bureau. Apparently, all the commercial banks are supposed to send stuff to the credit bureau.
Right.
The credit bureau compiles all the information from the commercial banks, credit unions, and all other creditors that they can get information from. So you have a complete credit report.
Okay.
So let's say Scotiabank gets your credit report.
Right.
Your credit report, you have all the information you have regarding your loans with Scotia, your loans with whoever, Bank of Bahamas.
Right.
If you're a furniture loan,
Right.
you're falling behind your bills,
Right.
bills, light bill, all that stuff should be in there.
Okay.
Because you're supposed to get a credit score.
Right. But apparently they ain't
Yeah.
fully completed yet.
No.
I wouldn't think
They
so.
Okay.
issue reports, but the report is not accurate because everything is not in there yet. All the information is not there yet.
Okay, well, that's what I wanted to find it. Okay, thanks. Thank you so much.
Correct. And also the question,
Okay, bye.
there's the question of, are they mandated by law to give the information to credit union, or is it?
Sorry about that. I was trying to get that information because that was kind of pressing on my mind.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So the other part of the question is this information voluntary, or is it mandatory by law that it be given to the credit union? Sorry, to the credit bureau.
See, I had to cut that conversation short. I'd answer that later. I'll
Yeah.
I'll have that answer for y'all for probably the next class. But that was sorry not to cut y'all off, but that was pressing on my mind because I really didn't know that they were issuing reports as a
No,
central bank. I didn't.
That's perfectly all right, because a lot of us didn't know either. Now we have an idea that things have begun and things are underway for sure. Okay. So,
Okay, sorry. Now, what was the question? I'm focused now.
your colleague wants to know who is a senior official 1 and senior official 2.
Okay, the senior official 1 is normally what organizations would call their managing director. And the senior official 2 would be like the second in charge for the most part of an organization. So that's why when you said it should be a differentiation between the CO and the senior 1, that is correct. And sometimes, once again, in special circumstances, they can hold the same position depending on the size of the organization. That's solely the reason a senior 1 can hold that position as a CEO, but those two are definitely supposed to be two different
positions.
positions.
So essentially then, the senior one is the managing director or first officer, the senior
Correct.
assisting managing director or second officer. in that
Correct. Right. And then, you have CFO, COO, all those are different positions. So that's the difference between a senior one and a senior two, because that's how we name it for central bank purposes. But in context of financial institutions, it'll be their managing directors.
Absolutely. Does that answer help?
Yes, thank you.
There you
You're
go. So
welcome.
when you hear senior 1 and 2, you know it means the managing director and assistant managing director or deputy managing director, pretty much the same. First officer, second officer, that's what we're talking about in the financial institutions. Okay. All right, good question. So please make sure you take a look at 8.3 and see what constitutes non-independence. It's very clear. You don't need rocket science to understand when you're not an independent INED. Okay, so if any of A, B, C, or D exists, then you are not independent. The financial institution should not have you as an INED. Okay, for sure. We already, if you go down to section 10, we have already exhausted the duties of the directors. The central bank guidelines pretty much recoups all the same information for how implementing strategic operations, hiring the CEO and FROs and senior management, getting the compliance officer together at the hiring of those persons. And we've seen the list. It's the same list that we've seen before. Directors should have a good understanding of how the business works so that they can make proper decisions about it. They should make sure that they're tracking risk management issues, that the independent persons, such as INEDs, are independent, same as we've seen before. Okay. They have to get management to provide them with the proper management information that they need on a timely basis, accurate, reliable information. All of these continue to be under the CPOB guidelines, the same as others principles of good governance by the directors. Okay, so that's no secret there at all. 10.6, common sense almost. Directors are required to be honest, exercise integrity, care, diligence, skill in carrying out their jobs, independent judgment. Don't let people persuade them. On the board, if you have a position, stick to your position. Don't let your friendships and other issues cause you to change your judgment on important decisions. Should be fully informed about things before they make a decision. These are all things that directors are required to do when they come to director meetings. Okay, for sure. All right. So again, the list for the duties of directors is a long one. Does that mean that you have to remember every single thing? Hell no, it's not even possible. Perhaps unless we're one of those special people. Just make sure you understand the key responsibilities of the directors and you should be fine. The key responsibilities are pretty specific in terms of what directors are required to do. Okay? They're required to implement strategic plans. They're required to hire CEO and senior management. They're required to conduct risk management processes. They're required to hire INEDs. And I'm just saying that off the top of my head, just from my discussions. And so I'm thinking a lot of that stuff will probably be stuck in your head as well, just because of our discussions, along with your reading and reviewing. Okay, so you should be fine. Okay. Please look at Appendix 1. We talked about the key risks for banks. We had a long list of them. Here in Appendix 1, you're given an explanation for what credit risk is, liquidity risk. Make sure you look at them, not only for examination purposes, but for your own information. They're very important to know, depending on the institution and the type of business environment you're in. Most of them are pretty straightforward by definition. You'll see they're not very long. They give you very specific responses, and chances are I will ask you to define a couple of them. Okay, I don't know which ones yet, but they won't be difficult to remember for sure. Okay. What is operational risk, anyone? What is the definition given for operational risk?
You want us to read it or you want us to?
Go ahead. Yeah, read it right off the page.
The risk to earnings or capitals arising from the potential, those inadequate information systems, operational or transactional problems in service and product delivery, breaches in internal controls, fraud, failure to adjust properly to changes in the operating complexities of the markets, or unforeseen catastrophes will
Yeah.
result in unexpected losses.
So in other words, don't let all that stuff like say, oh my God, the world is coming to an end. It's not. Those are just examples of operational risk. Anything that goes on that can potentially affect any day-to-day operation in any capacity is an operational risk. So if somebody's in there conducting fraud and they're not being discovered for a long time, that's an operational risk. Okay. No, it's no big sweat. If you have a product that is not working effectively or not getting to the customer effective because the marketing program is not working, that's an operating risk. If you have ATMs that constantly break down and people can't get the money, they're going to get fed up and go to another bank whose ATMs are working. That's an operational risk. That's what we mean. Any day-to-day activity that can occur to affect or impede the day-to-day operations of your entity is an operational risk. See? Simple as that. Technology risk has to do with what? Computers. That you don't have the proper computer systems in place to run your programs, to store your information properly backed up to make sure that if a catastrophe happens, you can access your data, no offsite locations and all this stuff. They would be technology risks. So that it's not difficult whatsoever. Right? What about compliance risk? What is that? Can somebody read that? Compliance risk.
Can you repeat that, please, Mr. Wilkinson?
What is compliance risk?
Compliance risk, the risk to earning or capital arising from violations or non-compliance with laws, regulations, guidelines, or regulatory derivatives, prescribed business practices, or ethical standards.
In other words, if the central bank has these guidelines and you violate them, remember what Alexandra said, that to go in 3 times to deal with those bastards, folk who look like they are deliberately not wanting to follow through. That's a problem. That's a compliance risk for them. And perhaps depending on what they're doing, there may be some unethical things going on, which is why they're not fixing it. So you have ethical issues coming up on the compliance risk. And then, of course, if companies are being fined for being non-compliant and not following the rules, they have to pay money. This money reduces profit. See? Reduced profit means there's less money available to pay dividends to shareholders. So everybody is impacted. That's the whole problem with these risks. All right. So when you're learning these definitions, you just want to learn basically what they are so that when they come up in your life, in your jobs, you would recognize some of them. Okay, for sure. All right. And I will ask you a couple of them just to make sure that you did take a look. One more risk. What is people risk? If there's such a thing. People risk. What's that? Anyone?
The risk to earnings or capital arising from the inadequacies in the competencies, compatibilities, or performance of an organization's personnel, failure to provide for management succession or staff backup, or human error, negligence, or misconduct.
I think that's pretty straightforward. I'm sure many of you in this room can identify with some of those things, if not personally, from people around you. and things that have gone wrong in your organization with regards to people. Somebody go on vacation and nobody comes to fill in, all hell breaks loose. There's no backup persons to cover certain things. These are all people risk issues. No succession planning. The CEO resigns or dies and nobody's in place to replace them because nobody thought about it. Same thing with the chairman of the board. Whatever the case, any issues that can affect the people side of the operation that is not planned for or provisions made for is a people risk. And a lot of organizations suffer a lot of economic loss because they don't plan for things like succession planning, backup persons, and so on. Okay? So these things are very real. You may not have heard it in the context of people risk, but now you know when these things are happening in your firm, they have a name. It's called people risk, okay? Along with all the other ones, okay? When you get down to Appendix 2, if you haven't gotten there already, it's something familiar. We don't have to discuss it anymore. You just have to go through and make sure you can define these different committees. When I say learn to define them, I don't mean you have to remember every single paragraph verbatim. Remember, if I ask you what an executive committee is, what would you say, someone? If I said define an executive committee, what would you say? Would you try to give me the whole paragraph? No. What would you say? Anyone? Define executive committee. What would be your answer next week? It's in Appendix 2, CBOV guidelines.
I'll paraphrase.
That's what I want you. That's what I want you to do, and that's what I want you to do next week too. Don't give me this whole big fat paragraph. That's just for you to read on your off time for details. But for your answer, what would you tell me?
Matters, well, yeah, matters that requires the board review and that they would bring up during meetings, board meetings.
Simple as that. Did you lose any sleep or any hair? No.
Was it right?
It was.
Okay, good.
If I ask you to define a credit committee, what would you say? Anyone?
The credit committee deals with the credit policies.
Absolutely. I mean, you want to say a little bit more, but that's essentially what it does. Okay. So when you're doing your review, keep your response and your review notes short but complete. See? Short but complete. So that when it's time to answer, like you give me 1 or 2 sentences and you're good to go. I don't need the whole paragraph.
I know what the audit committee is.
Okay, way to go. What is the audit committee?
The audit committee manages the relationship between the internal audit and the outside audit, like the independent audit persons, and it makes sure that all of the financial statements are accurate.
Absolutely. Way to go. Okay. I'll see if I can remember to put that in as one of the questions next week. So you sure you get that one correct? But that's the idea. Yeah. So that's the whole idea. When you're reviewing this stuff, make short, complete explanations for these things. So if questions come up for you to define them, describe them, whatever, you just give a nice clean explanation and you're good to go. Remember, I'm looking for good answers, but I don't expect them to be perfect. But if they're good and within the range and not like, if I said, well, what is an audit committee? And you say, well, does it have anything to do with Joe Biden? And I'm like, not really. This is too far away from the answer. See my point? But as long as you're within your answer, you're good. Okay. All right. So that's your responsibility for the CBOB guidelines. I think our discussion about those guidelines resulted in an excellent, not only bit of information in terms of what the central bank requires of financial institutions in Bahamas in terms of best practices, but I think we learned a lot of stuff informally, particularly from Alexandria and other students about specific things with regards to these guidelines. And so I'm very happy for that alone, that you guys got some practical feedback, especially from a regulator who is in the field. And trust me, whatever you hear her say, she is not guessing, nor is she dreaming. She knows exactly what she's talking about. So it's well worth remembering for God knows what in the future. But just know that we're all responsible for governance issues, so nobody gets to escape the responsibility. All right. The only other thing I want you to focus on for next week, please go to your OECD principles down to page 4 on my sheet where it says 6 principles of corporate governance. Let me know when you get there, because I'm going to refer to 6 specific things. You won't be responsible for the rest of it because we've pretty much talked about the rest of it. Are we ready? The 6 principles of corporate governance, OECD.
Which page?
On my page is page 4. OECD notes. Let me know when you see it. OECD 6 principles of corporate governance. Has anybody found it yet?
No.
What? Do you guys have the OECD? You should.
I see the table of contents which lists the 6 principles.
Scroll down. Scroll down until you see OECD 6 principles of corporate governance. Nobody's found it yet? If you see the table, scroll down, you should see it.
How far down is it? Because I don't see it either. And I have the physical book.
Let me see if we're looking at the same notes.
Right, because I have the G20 OECD principles, that's the front page. The second,
Okay, so you guys don't, I say, you don't have this information in there. Okay,
like I say, the table of contents have the 6 principles.
but you don't see it in the body of the information anywhere? If you have it in the table of
I
contents,
see about the principles, and it says the principles are intended to help policymakers, but I don't see it say, oh, these are the 6 principles.
that's interesting. The table of contents says it, but you don't see it in the body. You don't see number 1 saying ensuring the basis for an effective.
Yes, it's there.
It's there, isn't it?
Yes,
Yes, it
yes,
is.
it is.
I guess they're looking for just say the
Just
6
say,
principles
yeah.
and then list them. They're not
What page?
It's on page 13.
Thank
that's
you.
on page, yes.
Yeah. 2 heads are better than 1. Page 13 in your stuff. So you will not be responsible for.
I think we might be mistaken. I'm sorry, I need some help. Because
It says ensuring the basis for an effective corporate governance framework. That's it, right?
that's one of the principles.
That is
Yeah.
1. That's where we will begin, and I'll show you what you will be responsible for. Are you ready?
Okay.
Now
Okay.
I lost.
Are you on page 13 of your OECD notes?
I'm on page 13.
You don't see OECD 6 principles, number 1?
We're not on corporate governance guidelines no more. We're on the next one, the OECD principles of corporate governance. The next, when you click across, it'll be like when you go into it and you click right, because everything is how we have it, you'll see OECD principles and then you scroll down to page 13. Because the first one would be central bank corporate guidelines. The second one would be the OCD principles, that's the one we on, and then you scroll down to page 13.
Right.
In the notes that he gave us.
Okay. I
You
still
see
ain't
it?
I looking. Thanks.
It should be between corporate governance and the guidelines for money laundering and countering of financial of terrorism.
Yeah, it's the-
AML CFT guidelines. It should be between the two of those.
yeah, it's the only
The
document
notes.
that have OECD on it.
Oh, okay, okay. I think I find it.
So
Yeah.
what were you looking at before?
You see it now?
Yes.
Yeah, and then
Okay.
scroll down to page 13.
Okay.
Now,
Thank
let
you.
me tell you, there's an expression for your condition. Do you want to hear what it is?
I went here because I older than her, so I went here.
Here's the expression for the condition you suffered until you found it just now. It's called can't see for looking. Okay, that's what it is. So don't worry about it. So now we're all on the same page. The OECD 6 principles. Number 1, ensuring the basis for an effective corporate governance framework. Okay. And we are told in principle number 1 that the corporate governance framework should promote what? Transparent and fair markets, meaning information. This is referring to securities markets, where there's a lot of fraud going on, by the way, every single bloody day as we speak. And the efficient allocation of resources. In other words, don't waste the company's resources doing nonsense. It should be consistent with the rule of law of whatever jurisdiction and support effective supervision and enforcement by regulators. See? OECD rule, principle, not rule, principle number 1. You need to know that. Then scroll down to number 2. Number 2, the rights and equitable treatment of shareholders and key ownership functions. We talked about these things. I'm just giving you the perspective from the OECD, which is where all this stuff originated. Okay? Notice what the details are under number 2, principle number 2. The corporate governance framework should protect, see, and facilitate the exercise of who? The owner's rights. Who are the owners, class? Who are the owners of the entity?
The shareholder.
Of course. And in case you don't get it yet, a lot of times senior management is not working in cooperation with the shareholders. They are running their own personal, private agendas. That's why this principle is here under number 2. Protect and facilitate the shareholders. That's your job, Mr. Board, Mr. Senior Management. You're not there to run your personal stuff and fill your own pockets and ingratiate yourself. You're there for the sole purpose of satisfying the shareholders who own that company. Ensure that the treatment is equitable or fair for all shareholders, not only the ones who have the majority shares, but those who have minority shares as well, including foreign shareholders. Don't be prejudiced because the shareholder is from Waikiki in Hawaii or from Uganda in Africa. It doesn't matter. They're all shareholders. All shareholders should have the opportunity, all, not some, not your friend, not your racist group, not your preferred jurisdiction. All should have the opportunity to obtain what? Anyone? To obtain what? I'm the only one who's reading this. Number 2.
Sorry, should always have the opportunity to obtain effective redress for violation of their rights.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. If nobody's in here as a shareholder, maybe you don't understand that, but one day when you become a shareholder, you will. And even if you're not a shareholder, your firm has a governance responsibility to do it. Be fair to all, which means that there are certain boards and senior management people who are not fair to all. Because if they were fair to all, it wouldn't be there. Principle number 3, institutional investors, which means like credit unions and pension funds, etc., stock markets, and other intermediaries. Principle number 3, the corporate governance framework should provide sound incentives throughout the investment chain and provide for stock markets to function in a way that contributes to good governance. No hanky-pankying, no insider trading, no not taking compliant KYC information for persons who are trading. Do not facilitate fraudulent activity in the stock market. These things are not tolerated. The principle says, don't do it. Because when you do it, persons who invest their money in the stock market will get hurt in one form or another. Yet, the SEC in the United States and the SCB in the Bahamas report all the time, people are still trying to violate the principle by engaging in fraudulent, illegal, unethical activity in the markets. Okay. Principle number 4. Consider the role of stakeholders in corporate governance. Can somebody read that? What is that role?
Should I read or you prefer someone else?
Go ahead, let it rip.
The role of stakeholders in corporate governance. The corporate governance framework should recognize the rights of stakeholders established by law or through mutual agreements and encourage active cooperation between corporations and stakeholders in creating wealth, jobs, and the sustainability of financially sound enterprises.
Thank you. Now let me ask the big question and see if anybody remembers. Give me some examples of some of the stakeholders that we talked about throughout the last couple of weeks. Who are the stakeholders that we should protect?
Investors.
Investors, thank you very much. One of the most important group. Any others? Any other stakeholders? What about you? Employees, are you a stakeholder in the firm?
Yes.
Yes.
Senior management.
Senior management, are they stakeholders? Senior management would be considered what? Employees, remember? So they're part of the employee group. Any other stakeholders? How about the government? Shareholders? Creditors, the banks who lend your company money. These are all examples of stakeholders that boards must consider their interests at all times. If the board is involved in crappy stuff and the company loses money or fails, then creditors, for example, don't get paid. The millions of dollars they loan to that bloody company becomes delinquent and they have to run them down for the money. Like Resolve. See? Somebody didn't consider that in the governance policy. Otherwise, that $500 million would certainly not be sitting in Resolve trying to be collected at some unknown future date. My. If only we could collect 100 million of the 500 million, how many roads can we fix? Computers to put in the schools, healthcare programs that can be paid for. I'm just trying to show you that poor governance has major consequences across the board, whether you realize it or not, folks. Okay? Remember that. Well beyond the scope of this class and the discussions and examinations, always remember, poor governance in any capacity has far-reaching consequences for everybody affected. Because if you're a stakeholder as an employee and your company goes down the drain, you don't have a job, then you can't pay the mortgage or rent. You have to take your kids out of school and all this crappy stuff until you find stay. Always consequences. All right. Can somebody read disclosure number 5? Sorry, principle number 5.
I'll do it.
Okay. Let it rip.
I'm getting a feedback. Y'all can hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay.
We still getting a feedback. At least I am.
Yeah, it sounds
I
like.
think we have two mics unmuted.
I think it's Kendra. Kendra's trying
I
to.
think Ken.
Well.
Type, yeah, lagging.
Hello. Let me just say that whatever that was that we couldn't hear, that is an example of operational risk. Okay? So that was great as an example of operational risk. But something was stopping it from coming through clearly. Anybody knows what it was? Okay. Can somebody else read it? Because that one is not coming through clearly. It's coming through like that.
Okay, I'll continue.
Okay.
Disclosure and transparency. The corporate governance framework should ensure that timely and accurate disclosure is made on all material matters regarding the corporation, including the financial situation, performance, ownership, and governance of the company.
Thank you. Please remember this principle. This is so crucial. Disclose and be transparent. A lot of senior management, compliance officers, MLROs, and other people who are supposed to be reporting information to the board, and even the board who's supposed to be reporting to shareholders, sometimes they cover up information if they feel it is going to be unfavorable to whoever they're reporting to. That is a no-no. OECD principle number 5, central bank principle, and any other guiding principle in governance says, doesn't matter if the information is stinky, doesn't matter if somebody's going to get mad at you or mad at all, you are responsible for reporting it correctly. Lot of governance violations occur because of improper disclosure, non-disclosure, and a lack of proper transparency. Big old nasty, stinky problem in the Bahamas and everywhere in the world. Okay? Principle number 5. Even in the home, which is an entity that is required to be governed, will have good governance as well. Spouses are guilty of non-disclosure to the other person, improper disclosure, lying, lack of transparency, cover-ups. So this principle number 5 is prevalent in every possible type of entity. And we are asked not to do it, to go ahead and disclose properly, even though the information might not be accepted favorably, to let the truth prevail. All right, and then finally, OECD principle number 6, anyone?
I can read.
Okay.
The responsibilities of the board. The corporate governance framework should ensure that the strategic guidance of the company, the effective monitoring of management by the board, and the board's accountability to the company and the shareholders.
Thank you. So we end with the board responsibility. We begin with it way back when, and now we end with it. The board has the responsibility to check these things and make sure they are working properly, period. They are the first line of defense in terms of the top proper management of the company from the top, and they're the ones who have to take responsibility and will be held responsible for any issues that occur within the operations of the company. All right. So as far as the OECD principles are concerned, those are the 6 that you are likely to be responsible for. So make sure that you know them, that you can describe them, and that you know what they are. They are not difficult. Most of them we've already discovered and discussed in one form or another, but I want you to be able to identify them as the OECD principles of good governance specifically, okay? Because they pretty much summarize a whole lot of everything that we were talking about. All right. And so we will end there. You know what you're responsible for now. Any questions before we break so that you guys can go and start making preparations? All right. Don't forget to converge on Miguel about the examination where it's going to be held and blah, blah, blah. I will join you in that parade so that we can all be on the same page by Tuesday. If you do not get any feedback as quickly as you think you should, please let me know. Certainly let me know what feedback you do get so that we can all end up on the same page before next Saturday at 12:30. We have no confusion in the matter whatsoever. Any other questions before we break? All right, fantastic. Alison was not in this class today. Alison, are you there?
I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Doggone it. When were you going to tell me, Alison, that you were here? I was just getting ready to send an APB out to see how we were going to update you on all this good stuff.
I just sent one to you that I didn't receive that email on the OECD.
You didn't?
No.
You didn't get that from Miguel?
Nope.
Okay, then send Miguel an email and tell him to send you your OECD material.
Will do.
And make sure when you get it, it has these 6 principles on it, page 13 of that material. If you do not see these 6 principles, call me back, send me a note and let me know.
Will do. Okay,
fantastic. Okay, so Alison is here. You got all that stuff. Let's see who else is not here back. Deandra, are you here? No, Deandra. So that means she has to be updated somehow. All right, fantastic. Of course, if you guys think of anything that you want to raise before next class, you can send me an email if you have any additional questions and let me know. I'll be happy to respond. Otherwise, good luck with your review. I know Monday's a holiday. I'll try to use some of it for review while everybody's having fun. Try yourself down for a couple of hours and do some really productive work, because once the work week starts on Tuesday, things get weird until Friday, and then Saturday's the exam, and then things get weird. All right, so good luck and take care until next week.
Good day.
Good day.
Good day.
Bye. Take care.
Good day.
Good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Good day.
Take care, Alexandria.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Tricetta.
Sure.
Kendra. Okay.